So, guys, I want to talk about a tough video, and I want to talk about the time that my younger brother had a wedding a few months ago, and he actually didn't invite us, and me and my older brother actually didn't know about the wedding, and I do want to talk a little bit about that. Like, I remember like I'm telling that to my Uber driver, and he's like, your family's just like a bunch of jerks for doing that because they just didn't invite me. And then I also remember, one of my relatives saying, hey, if you didn't do controversial videos, maybe you get invited to family events. But there's been a lot of different things that, I would say too, is that the other thing that I want to mention is that I've been in situations with my family, like my aunt died, like 4 or 5 years before I knew, and they were like, "Hey, you didn't ask," and other things like that. Like, I actually have relatives who actually don't remember my name, or even like remember my father calling me Matthew, or like the name of my other brother. Like, I have actually family members who don't remember my name. And that's ultimately just really disrespectful. And I've also known that with my family, there's some emotional abuse where it's almost like, you know what, we're gonna call you Matthew. We're gonna say I don't remember your name, or Brian, whoever your name is, until you actually, go down to New Jersey every weekend and hang out with the family. Until I, decide to settle down and have a bunch of babies, or I settle down and hang out, or I'm a loser for living with my brother. Like, it's definitely like very frustrating that it's like that, and it's also very disrespectful. And I think one thing that I will not forgive is that my older brother is a very well put together guy. He has mental health issues like me, but he definitely is very respectful. So the fact that he wasn't invited was just really really disrespectful. And about my younger brother, he's a good kid. I respect him, but when he was like, when he was like younger, yes, he was a bit of a spoiled brat. Like, I've told stories, like I mentioned the story where I had to spank him because he had an issue running out of the house and hitting me and using profanity. There was also that time too when my dad intimidated me to come home for Thanksgiving because he missed me. And there's also like other times, too, where my brother just didn't have really, really good boundaries and other things like that, So it's almost like, we kind of see a little bit of an extension of that, of just like, okay, you know what, he can do whatever he wants. Or it feels like my family has two families, which was, and the family that my parents really have is that, that he's kind of like their favorite son because he hangs out a lot, or he may give them like a grandkid and everything like that, really. And it is what it is. And I also feel that, with parents, they don't care about their kids' happiness. And I think that's also true with my parents. Like, my parents were emotionally abusive growing up. When my dad ran for governor, he was saying things on his commercial like he raised 3 black kids and black kids with mental health issues. And he really humiliated me, and he really hurt me really deeply. I thought it was suicide. I destroyed my film career, and I felt very, very embarrassed. And I remember saying in one video that he has heart issues, and even though I work in a hospital, if he was in the same hospital dying, I wouldn't visit him because of what he did, really. And then also just a lack of a lot of accountability, And I remember, like, when I got fired from one job a few years ago, he was like, laughing on the phone and saying, you can run from it, you can hide from it, but I know you all my life. You are a kid with a mental illness. And he was like laughing as he was saying that. But he always seems to kind of have a complex of, I'm a black kid with a mental illness when I'm actually mixed raced. And also the other thing too is, just emotionally abusing me through my life, really, and treating me like I'm stupid. Like, I remember like a few years ago, I needed to go to court to get like adoption papers, and my dad just encouraged me to go to court and saying, that's part of the process, is that I go, really. And what I actually found out later on was that he was supposed to be there, but he manipulated me the entire time. A few years ago at my former job, I got in trouble at work, and I remember how there were people in the union. The union president breached my confidentiality and talked to my father about everything that was going on, really. And I was like 28 years old, and my dad just told me to be humble and forget about it. And it really came off like he had like the right to know my personal business. And and other things like that, really. So I think with my family, they've definitely hurt my self esteem a lot, and that's why I don't hang out. But also, too, that I do not believe in the mentality of, okay, well, you know what, I deserve to be disrespected until I become, the family man. People cannot remember my name. People can, not invite me to family events, really. And they could also do it to my older brother, who has been very, very respectful and all that. It's just like, fuck you to both of us. And then the other thing that I also have to say is, family just does not make me happy. I've never been happy as a kid. And then also, too, I remember really when I was a kid, if I looked depressed, my dad would get into my face and start yelling at me and being like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And be like, okay, if you don't tell me what's wrong, no TV for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you're going to tell me. So I grew up with like a fake smile, really, because I felt like, I can't feel what I need to feel, really. And I think that that's how I turned out as an adult. Like, as I said before, and I say again, like, I remember like one time in college, my dad wanted me to call my other dad for his birthday. And I was like, damn, it feels like community service. Or I remember one time my dad had his 50th birthday or 40th birthday. And I was kind of like, he asked me if I was available, and I said no, I wasn't really, because family just brings up a lot of emotions, and then also I don't like being around my family because my dad's going to criticize me for not being for living with my brother, traveling instead of getting my own place, settling down with a girl and making a baby and ruining my life by having kids, and I just can't deal with a control freak. I can't. And when I was in college, I told myself my parents are not good for my mental health because I'm going to turn into a person where I'm going to be like Seymour Skinner if I'm around them. Like, I'm going to be bossed around and live a life that doesn't make me happy, really. And that's kind of why I stepped away, is because family does not make me happy. And for such a long time in my life, I've been in situations growing up where I would see my parents flip out and throw furniture and use a lot of profanity and be frustrated and be angry and then say, hey, I'm going through a hard time, really. So I always tell myself I don't want to have a family because it brings up those feelings. And I also tell myself that really a family dynamic is somebody with a lot of emotional maturity, being the alpha and everything like that, really. Or, it's just a way to get your balls busted or bossed around. Or, when it came to like, years and years ago when I last talked to my dad, he wanted me to save money. So every single time I saw him, he would always intimidate me and glare his eyeballs at me like, what, yes, you have a paycheck, you are going to save money, you are going to move out of your brother's place and do all this stuff. And then I also remember one time for Thanksgiving, my dad was going on vacation. So, my brother said, he's cooking something and he doesn't have any space for Thanksgiving Day leftovers. So my dad kind of yelled at us to go home with all the leftovers and everything like that, really. So it's like, why would I want to be around a tyrant? Why would I want to be around somebody who doesn't respect me? Why would I want to be around people who are condescending? Why would I be around somebody who emotionally abused me for having mental health issues? And ultimately, and mostly too, and then, I don't know about my younger brother, but he doesn't really know the full stories about, what kind of my father is. My father is a really great man, but he's definitely, like I've said, he grew up with child abuse and emotional abuse, and my grandmother was very bossy and controlling of him. So sometimes, people believe that that's the best way to teach people, like, by being harsh or controlling or intimidating or motivating by harshness or hurting feelings or making fun of mental health issues and all that stuff, So it's almost like, why would I want to go to a wedding if my dad's going to like bust my chops? He's going to like say, he's proud of my younger brother getting married. And then hypothetically, we said about, well, my older brother, Byron does this or Matt's like this and other things, So there always seems to be a level of, disrespect as motivation, really. And I've kind of talked about Rochelle from Everybody Hates Chris, and I've did a video about that disrespectful parents. It's not good when you're a disrespectful parent trying to raise children with respect and all that. So yeah, it does hurt, and I do feel like it was just ultimately like another motivation. My family's trying to motivate me to be like, okay, you know what, you gotta be a family man. You got to, settle down, have kids. You got to accept that you are a black man with a mental illness, and maybe marry a black woman because we want you to kind of embrace your inner black man. When I'm actually mixed race, I'm not. I'm like less than 20% black, and then I'm also way more than my mental health issues. Because, like I said, when I suffered from PTSD, very poor support system, I was told really suck it up. Nobody cares about how you feel. People care about your results. I live with a relative who's mental health issues who has very inappropriate behavior. So my family overlooks that, So they only care really more about my results, not how I'm struggling, and and that's kind of why, as I said, why kind of be a family man and all this stuff, and then there's also no sense of understanding where I'm coming from. More like, well, you're not invited or you're a black sheep of the family because you don't move out, you don't settle down and have babies, and if it took you a long time because you've gone through emotional abuse and depression and almost being murdered and other things like that, we're gonna overlook that. But it does really hurt me deeply that I was not invited to my brother's wedding. It is very disrespectful. I actually have a cousin. No, I actually have an uncle. One of my dad's brothers, who I think his name was Jimmy or something like that, who disowned his daughter, and the family doesn't talk to him. So it's almost like I'm not on his caliber. Do I have things to work on? Yes. Am I an asshole? Yes. Am I working hard to be a better person? Yes. Do I admit that I have weaknesses? Am I still like somebody who has some maturity issues? Yes, I do. But but it's almost like what Quagmire said in Family Guy. We can respect somebody who acknowledges that they're an asshole and they have things to work on versus somebody who's an asshole and doesn't acknowledge that they have stuff to work on. Really, um, so yeah, like I'm happy with my life, and my life makes me happy because nobody controls me, nobody tells me what to do. I'm not intimidated into getting into doing better for myself because, like I said, I could see myself, just blowing my brains out one day because I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm following everything that my father wants me to do. Like I'm supposed to settle down, marry a black woman, have a bunch of black babies. I'm supposed to maybe write a book about being the son of a gay man and all the great things my parents have done for me. I'm supposed to got my passport. I'm supposed to go to Africa and embrace my African roots and do all that stuff. I know some of it's gaslighting, but I always felt like with my dad, he always wanted me to accept that I'm mentally ill, accept that I'm black when I'm mixed race, and also accept that maybe I'm homosexual. Because I remember when I was going to therapy in high school, the therapist said that my dad thought that I was a gay man or bisexual, and that happens sometimes too when you have parents who are LGBTQ, is that sometimes they assume that you may be a gay man, and that's not the case really. Or I remember how when I was a kid, my dad assumed that I wanted to be a big vegetarian, and you know, um, get to know people, and all that stuff, So you know, it does hurt that I wasn't invited to my brother's wedding, but I also understand that I don't really like family events, so why send the invitation when I'm not going to respond to it? I can get that, and I was traveling. I can get that, but I can also get that that sometimes I can be annoying or frustrating to deal with. I can get that, or sometimes if I have videos online where I'm talking about controversial subject matter, including dysfunctional family dynamics, people can be like, hey, maybe I'm not going to invite you because I'm afraid that maybe you don't have that much of a filter. I can understand that, but I can also see the other side of, what, it's just disrespectful to me. It's disrespectful to my older brother who is a hard worker and he knows how to behave at events, but he's not invited, and when we find out months and months later, really, So, um, and I think that, as I said, I'm happy to share these things because these things do happen in other families where, you know, um, you may have relatives that believe in disrespecting or icing out or ghosting, other family members, to motivate them to do better in life or to be like, you know what, you don't live up to a standard. So, fuck you, really. Or, you know what, well, I've caused you a lot of harm and emotional abuse, but I'm old, I'm retired, I care about possibly future grandkids, I care about my own happiness, and taking account instead of taking accountability for how I hurt all my children, really. But in the end of the day, you know what, life is hard, life is complicated, but I found my own happiness, and that's the only thing that matters to me because definitely when I grew up, my happiness did not matter.